Sometimes leadership isn't about speaking the loudest. It's about finding the courage to speak when your voice matters most. I'm Navir Walkowitz, class of 99. Long Blue Leadership starts now. Today's guest is Air Force Lieutenant Colonel retired Kimberly Ford, United States Air Force Academy class of 1990. She's had a remarkable career. She flew KC-135s, C-17 command pilot, instructor pilot, senior air mobility command leader. Today, she serves as an Alaska Airlines pilot, aviation advocate, and champion preserving the legacy of our Tuskegee Airmen and Women Air Service Pilots, or WASPs, while inspiring the next generation of aerospace leaders. I should also add that Kim is one of our 2025 recipients of the Leadership Achievement Award. Kim, we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's just an honor to be here to speak with you today. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so here on Long Blue Leadership, we like to jump right into a really key moment in your life. And one, if we dial back the time a little bit, goes back to your 3-degree year at the Air Force Academy. And they had something at the time, I think you mentioned it was rate your neighbor. So something that you all did, and you scored a D. I'm curious on what that was about. And then can you take us back to that conversation in that time?
Correct. They had something at the time called Rate Your Neighbor, and that called for your classmates, your peers, people above you and below you, rating your ability to be a leader in the cadet wing and in your squadron, and then eventually a leader in the Air Force. And so everyone in your class would get a rating. I had come into the meeting thinking that I had done really well and that my passion was shining through. And so imagine my surprise when I found out that I received the equivalent of a D grade. My air officer commanding was empathetic, but he was also very concerned. And what I did appreciate was he did give me the chance to respond. At that time, I just felt really disappointed. You know, I'd come into the academy. I'd really wanted to be in aerospace. I was really excited about STEM. I was so happy to have the opportunity to be there. And so I must admit that I really felt crushed when I heard his words that I hadn't done as
Absolutely.
well as I thought I had.
It almost sounds a little bit like a 360-degree kind of assessment. What in particular, um, I guess, attributed to that kind of that score or that rating from your peers? What did they see, I guess, in that to give you that score?
Yes, looking back with my lens now, I know that there are different types of leadership, different styles of leadership. But I think at the time, the type of leadership that was expected was someone who was assertive, who was upfront, who was more sort of direct. At the time, I was a young cadet who definitely needed to be mentored and learn some skills. I think what they saw in me was someone who was very quiet. I had not had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to speak about who I was, my background, my passion for aviation, someone who didn't make eye contact, and, someone who maybe didn't greet them on a personal level, who didn't check in before a session, during a session, and maybe after a session. And so they just really weren't sure about my aptitude. And I can understand that big picture. I was someone who definitely needed to be mentored and definitely needed to learn those skills in a style that was commensurate with my personality and what I had to bring to the table.
Well, you talked about being passionate, and you went in feeling really good and hoping that it shined through. How did you adjust maybe or adapt after that feedback to bring your voice and that passion forward? What did that look like in your leadership journey at that time?
Yes, I remember the air officer commanding said, "Hey, let's talk about this. What are you bringing to the table?" And so I said, "Wow, I'm someone who wants to be here. I'm someone who wants to fly. I am someone who wants to give back to my country, and I want to serve my nation." And so after that, I'm lucky that I had a good group of mentors, both peers and older cadets, and I was able to sit down with them and get that constructive feedback and constructive criticism. So I was able to speak with my flight commander about, goals that I had. I want to do, eventually I want to do the soaring program. I want to do, which I may have already finished by that point. I want to do the T-41 program, which was the solo program at the time. I would like like to be a pilot. And so I really practiced making eye contact, speaking about my goals, sharing my passion, and just really checking in and making sure I receive that feedback from my leadership, and then also points where I could improve. As an 18, 19-year-old, young woman who was very shy, that was a lot for me. But it took a lot of courage. So I'm really proud of myself for being able to get there, to be able to interact and have those conversations that I needed to have with my cadet leadership at the time.
Well, let's fast forward now because I feel like that voice that you found has been really instrumental in some of the advocacy and work that you've done around really highlighting the legacies of our Tuskegee Airmen and the Women Air Service pilots, our WASPs. Can you talk about, where that came into play, like how finding your voice, what that looked like, and what some of that important work was that you did?
Yeah, yeah, I will go back. When I was a young woman, still in high school, I had really started to show interest in aviation. And we didn't know a lot of people who were pilots or in aerospace. And so, what my parents did for me, especially my mother, who loved to read, is she found me a lot of books. And she found me books about the Tuskegee Airmen and about the Women's Air Service pilots as examples. And so I read about these courageous, young people who were serving during World War II, all of the challenges and barriers that they had to overcome, and the life lessons that they had to share. And so I really took that to heart, and that really helped to inspire me. During my career, I had the opportunity to speak with some Tuskegee Airmen during my Air Force career by attending conferences. As I moved back to the Seattle area, when I came back to Joint Base Lewis McChord, I had the opportunity to serve at the Seattle Museum of Flight and serve in panels. We would talk about subjects such as the Berlin airlift, some of the flying out of Ramatelli in Italy, and just sort of passing along those leadership lessons. Um, I had also joined my Sam Bruce chapter, Tuskegee Airmen. We were able to work on some youth programs and grow them from very small programs to larger programs, which really passed along those important leadership lessons to young people and inspired them on their journeys to becoming pilots. Um, I had another opportunity to volunteer with the Congressional Gold Medal. Ceremony for the Women's Air Service pilots. So I went to Washington, D.C. I was able to pass along the Congressional Gold Medal to June Leckie, and spend time with her family and learn about her service. So I always called her my WASP. I'm lucky that I was able to go to the museum, the Women's Air Service Pilot Museum in Sweetwater, Texas, and have the chance to interview WASPs, volunteer alongside of WASPs, and as well pass along my message of my service and sort of help to grow young people. Um, Through my Sam Bruce chapter, I met mentors such as Bill Holloman, who was an original Tuskegee Airman, and Ed Drummond, who shared their stories of just leadership and courage. So to me, those lessons are so important to pass on to the next generation.
I think you hit it on hit the nail on the head when you talk about sharing the stories. And as we share your story today, I think it's really important that our viewers and our listeners kind of really appreciate that not all leaders, approach things in the same way. To your point, you start off really shy and you found your voice, and then you're able to even share stories of other leaders. I'm curious in your journey of, how that continued to evolve. Where did you find yourself? um, really championed perhaps? You mentioned your parents early on, and understanding your love for aviation. Did they also kind of show up for you in that way of helping you to hone in on your leadership skills a little earlier?
Yes, yes. As a young person, I knew early on that I wanted to go to college, that I wanted to achieve a graduate degree, and seeing those examples of my father serve overseas and my mother alongside with him, I
So
knew
they
that I
both served your parents?
Sure. Actually, my father was in, Army. He got up he's in the Army. He got up to the rank of captain, and my mother, they had just gotten married, and my mother joined him in France, where they served, outside of Paris at a place called
Well,
Saran, France. Um, so I just saw that example. Um, They started taking me to museums. As I mentioned, they had me read books, but they did see that I was more shy and more quiet. And so they started really relaying to me, they just passed along that I'm a leader. I am a leader in my own way. These were often quiet messages, they weren't often direct. But I just remember when I showed up at the academy, I remember that message that I am a leader, that I am capable, that I can do these jobs, that I had just as much of an opportunity to succeed. They were really just strongly instilled in me.
I love those affirmations. And I'm curious, obviously you went on to go to pilot training. How did that continue to evolve and being a quiet leader show up in the cockpit or amongst your peers? Were there times where you had to be more assertive or use a different voice? How did you kind of deal with how you're wired, so to speak, with what was needed for the moment?
Yeah, so one story that I'll take you back to goes back to, jump school.
Okay.
One of my friends, wanted me to take jump school. I was really uncertain about this, and she's like, "No, we let's take jump school together." We were both seniors, and it was just a great opportunity. We went through the training. I had always, thought of the people that did jump school as just these amazing people, and I wasn't sure if I could just reach that pinnacle. I'm so lucky that we both made it through the training, and then you get to the point where you're standing in the door. So this is the point where you take all of your training and you are going to execute this training and you're going to face this really critical, intense moment. And so to me, it was sort of like a parallel of I was finding my voice. I'm a cadet, and then I have the chance to go to pilot training. I remember before we stood in the door on the ground, I had spoken to the jump master, which was really intimidating for me as a young cadet. And I said, I want to jump out the door. Can you help me get there? Can you sort of show me how you get yourself ready to do that? And so looking back now, when I got into the door, he basically looked me in the eye and he helped me to take a deep breath, to settle myself, and to take that big step forward. And I jumped out the door and I went on to do 5 jumps and I completed that program.
I have to give you props because I think the fact that you recognized in yourself, um, giving yourself the permission to ask for help, right? You said, "Can you help me get to and through the door and accomplish this jump and then go on to get your jump wings," I think is really powerful and a leadership lesson in itself. Was that something that you just had happened or you've seen it modeled before you or it was just something in you that said, "I'm gonna ask for help here"?
He certainly helped me to get that warrior mindset. So I believe even back before, um, maybe wanting to do a certain program at in high school, or even wanting to apply for the academy, my father said, you just have to step forward and do it. Also dating back to my father's father, who was one of the first Black policemen in Baltimore City. He was also a very reserved man, very much like myself. And I remember speaking to him about being nervous about applying to the academy and going to the academy. And he said, "You know what, Kim, you just got to get started. You've just got to take that first step." So basically putting yourself in that space, that mental space, uh, being prepared, being confident, and believing in yourself and taking that step forward. Um, I was able to carry that through going to pilot training. I was really nervous. A lot of cadets had the opportunity to do a lot of flying, a lot of discovery flights or programs like Civil Air Patrol or scouting. And my parents they were able to provide me with one amazing discovery flight. But it was tough. I had to learn a lot of information at a short period of time. I had an amazing UPT instructor for my first flight. His name is Colonel retired now, Kevin Maston, and he actually went on to become a Thunderbird. He went to the University of Washington, where I'm from, so a neat link there. And I just told him about my fears. I'm nervous. I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't know if I can keep up with the other students. And he said, "Do you really want to do this and finish this program?" And I said, "I really do." And he said, "Well, let's work together basically to develop this warrior mindset, or this mindset of focus, of intensity, of bringing your best, of being excellent, like the Tuskegee Airmen." So he really worked with me and helped me to do that. So I was basically able to bring that to serving throughout my career, up to serving in Iraqi freedom, enduring freedom, just really taking that deep breath, knowing that I am capable, knowing that I am a good leader, and sort of executing the mission, working with the crew or working with the team that I'm working with at the time. So I'm really proud that that started as, as a child with my parents, was honed also at the Air Force Academy and with other mentors through my career.
Were there particular pillars of leadership or things that he said, this is how, your process to thinking like a warrior, having that more warrior mindset, what did that look like?
Yes, yes, he focused on, telling me to sort of don't listen to the noise and the other inputs, fly the airplane and focus on the important tenets, the important things that you need to do. You need to fly the airplane into the air. You need to make it act in ways that you want it to act. He spoke with me about, learning all of the information, such as, chair flying or visualizing. He said, I want you to know that information cold. So if you know the information cold and you're nervous, it'll allow you to fly the airplane and focus. So we would actually have study sessions where we would go to the squadron and we would basically go through our steps and procedures and just really practice focusing and just eliminating all of that noise, flying the aircraft and putting the airplane, in acrobatics and VFR flight and IFR flight.
And for someone who's not in aviation, what does VFR flight and IFR flight mean?
Visual flight rules where you can see, and instrument flight rules where there are clouds and you're not able to see the grounds.
Well, I can imagine that's really helpful going through the repetition of actually being in the cockpit, not in the cockpit, right? Like you said, chair flying. I think that's really powerful, visualizing. Were there any other kind of key um, instructions or thoughts in that process of putting on the warrior mindset and being able to push through any of the self doubt or kind of the reservations that not just you, but I think other leaders share?
I think it's also, being the consummate professional, always learning about your craft. So I'm always learning something new. I'm always reading, always listening to what others might say, always listening to feedback. And always showing up, being early, looking professional, having your uniform look well. Um, just sort of those are some of the other tenets that he taught me also.
And I think about what you're doing now. So you're a current pilot with Alaska Airlines. Oftentimes, many of our graduates do go into, especially those who served as pilots, go into, I think, commercial aviation. Was that an easy process for you, or what? How did that challenge you as a leader? Was that something that was already kind of written in your game plan of life?
Right. So I actually became a commercial pilot in 2001. So it was right around the time of 9/11. It was a little bit challenging just because I had just finished my active duty where I was flying the KC-135. I did the Kosovo operations and also Northern and Southern Watch, where you're basically flying around Saudi Arabia. Um, I finished that, and I was just starting my time as an Air Force reservist as a C-17 pilot. So I did initial training for the MD-80 at the time, which was an older passenger airline for Alaska Airlines, and then I was also starting training for the C-17. There is quite a difference in culture. You're learning with, working with a different crew, slightly different style of crew resource management. Your purpose is, a little bit different. You're flying passengers and some cargo to get to where they need to go. So I'm really lucky that I was able to rely on mentors to step me through, do that visualizing and chair flying. Soon after that, I was actually called up to serve full time for the Air Force for about 3 to 5 years for operations enduring and Iraqi freedom. That's operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I always had to, I took copious notes. We had a lot of conversations on those flight decks. As we were doing our military operations, there were a lot of Alaska Airlines and other airline pilots. And so I'm so lucky that I could fly with some really experienced crew members who could really talk to me about this civilian procedures. It is fast paced. You're working at large civilian airports. So I had to learn those standardized procedures, and I had to learn to work with the crews to be able to execute that civilian mission well.
I'm curious about, your service while you were deployed in support of those different operations. If you could talk about where you saw yourself evolve as a leader, how did you continue to grow in that space from, where you started as a, quiet, more reserved leader, still quite passionate, but where did that show up and how did it show up in the deployed spaces?
Right. Let's see. In the deployed spaces, just to give people an idea of the operations at the time, they were very fast paced. This is like around 2001, 2002, and on. We had to fly a large part of the mission because a lot of the experience was in the Air Force Reserve. I was serving out of Joint Base Lewis McChord, and so we would take large contingents of, especially Army personnel from Joint Base Lewis McChord, usually to the East Coast, maybe to Europe, such as Germany, and then overseas. It might have been the opportunity for me to sort of have a briefing, and then, in general, the mission would match the briefing. Usually, this is in the KC-135. I would say in the C-17, it was very intense, where you were on alert, and then the mission could change and evolve. It might be, incredibly intense where it was at night. You might be landing, with night vision goggles on a runway that wasn't lit, and so there were very intricate details. So changing mission, very intense missions, and the last part was very long missions. So I believe that, I had to really dig deep, and always be willing to, um have that resilience and more resilience and more endurance than I'd ever had before. Also working with a larger crew, for a longer period of time, just really I knew that the people around me knew their jobs well, they were motivated, they wanted to serve, and they could execute well, and they were passionate about the mission. So I think just having that stamina and endurance and flying in more challenging conditions, definitely.
When you're stepping into some of those roles, there's this need to build a team very quickly and trust. And, obviously, leadership is part of pulling all that together. How did you do that successfully? I mean, aside from having stamina and really just I think being ready, were there any other things that you felt you really tapped into from your strengths that helped you to navigate that cohesion and that trust together pretty quickly?
Right. It seems like one of the easiest way to build trust and have that team is there are really standardized roles that are expected in the crew. And when the crew knows that you know your role inside and out and that you can execute well, that you will, speak the way you need to speak, that you'll fly the way you need to fly, that really quickly helps to build trust. I think also it helps to be able to speak for through the mission, to be able to talk about some of those key crunch points and, options that we would have as a crew, and basically work together to make decisions. And also, if that one person had information that the rest of the crew didn't have, such as the need to go around or to stop or to turn the other way, that the entire crew, especially the other pilot, would listen to that information and execute immediately. Um, so building that trust by, performing your role, being prepared, going over the mission, going over those crunch points, and acting quickly when you needed to act. Um, that really seemed to form a cohesive crew.
If we can go back a little bit, I'm curious to your time. You know, I guess it's not really going back. It's a bit more current now, but you'd mentioned a little bit ago that working with Alaska Airlines, the pace is a little different and the mission has changed. I'm curious on how your leadership has evolved when you think about a changing mission, and maybe it's not life or death or national security, but how do you continue to evolve as a leader when the stakes aren't as high?
Right, right. So, in the military mission, it was usually time critical, and it called for often a very assertive type of quiet leadership. So you're still bringing that assertive type of quiet leadership, but you're also bringing customer service to families and passengers who are getting to where they need to go, whether it be a vacation or to visit family or taking a business person where they need to go. So you're having that. patience, letting people know that they're welcome, that you're happy to see them on board. You're working with crew members who may not have that sort of military background, and so there are different communication styles. Um, different, they're different people, and so you're really sort of reading who they are and making sure that you can communicate information in a way that is effective for them as a person and their age and experience level. um, you are it is also a compressed time frame, so ensuring that you're getting loaded and boarded within that time frame, um, and sort of helping the airline to get those, different pushes of different aircraft at different times off on time. So I think I had to just sort of maybe dial it back a little bit in my presentation, make sure I just gave that great customer service. I would say in the cockpit, it is that same in the flight deck. I'm sorry, you're giving that same crew resource management, that same building that same trust within the person who, letting them know that you know your job and that you're ready to execute. So I would say it's probably more insane the same within the flight deck there.
I would almost go so far as to say is the ability to understand when you need to assert more and when maybe a more quiet and customer service oriented leadership style needs to be used. You almost have a superpower of understanding when to employ them. And I might ask you this, how do you help others who maybe have the other side of the leadership spectrum where they come in I'm a very assertive type leader. How do you help them see the value in your approach that is natural to you?
We have a moment at the end of our flights at Alaska Airlines, where we sort of we sit back and we basically say, "How do we think that went? What could we change?" And we speak about, how did the crew receive our message? How did the passengers receive our message? How did the gate personnel receive our message? And sometimes you could say like, "Okay, well, maybe we could have said this way. Maybe we could have responded this way as we were flying the approach." Um, and so I'm able to sort of give my perspective and maybe how I might have done things, or perhaps sometimes the we'll divide duties, and the captain will say, Okay, I see here maybe you would be great at doing this duty. Could you take this over?" And so I think that's how I can show that maybe a different style of leadership would be more effective in those certain situations. And we're trained to really listen, um, and just take in the feedback that's coming towards us. And I would say all of the crew members are very good at listening, adjusting, and taking in what's offered to them.
By you kind of sharing the ability to listen, but also, share your perspectives, I think in itself is another great leadership lesson that strong leaders have the ability to listen to others and take in other inputs before making decisions or moving forward. So I think that was a wonderful recollection of how you do that in the civilian world in aviation. So, one of the things we love to do is ask our guests what they're doing every day to be a better leader. Would you mind sharing with us what that is?
Let's see. I do a number of things. One is I try to take a quiet moment just to do some breathing and just really to center myself and ground myself. So a quiet moment. I'm trying to get enough sleep. It's amazing how much good sleep can affect your ability to execute your day properly. I'm trying to get some exercise every day. So whether it be I'm trying to do a lot of weightlifting, Pilates, yoga, doing things to strengthen myself as well as ground myself. And I'm also making sure I'm taking a break to do something fun, something that I enjoy with my spouse or a friend, going out to lunch or something like that. So, trying to take care of myself and make sure I take some time for fun and just set time for grounding and for breathing a few minutes each day. I find those things very helpful.
Is that something that you sort of employed as you've become more understanding of time and experience, or have you always kind of operated in that way, just to kind of appreciate the moments, take time to fill your cup, etc.
I would say that that is something that my parents instilled in me a long time ago. My mother instilled in me, especially just that breathing, and just taking that moment and just grounding yourself. I remember we went to some sort of exercise classes together when I was in junior high and high school. So I'm really proud that she instilled that in me early. My father also exercised with me as I was getting ready for my academy initial fitness test to get in.
Well, frankly, I mean, they really did help prepare you so well for being a cadet, and then going on to be highly successful both as an officer and then in the civilian world. But speaking of when you're a cadet, if you could go back in time now, Kim, and tell, Cadet Kimberly Ford, you know, something that she should be thinking about to be a better leader down the road, what would you tell her?
I would say always believe in yourself. Know that you can do this, that you are capable, and you have an important perspective to bring to the table. Your voice is necessary, and you have something to bring. So I would just say it's coming. Keep believing yourself, and I would also say to her, keep finding different mentors. Some mentors are sort of focused on the operation that you're doing on a narrow scale, and some are more big picture mentors. So rely on those mentors and peers and continue taking that feedback and always growing. Remain a student, always improving, making corrections. And it's okay to have those missteps. And it's an amazing journey as you keep learning and growing and becoming a better leader. That's what I would tell Cadet Kim.
That is outstanding. And may I ask you, what are you most proud of about yourself as a leader?
I am proud of resilience, that I learned how to be resilient leader, that I learned from my parents, relatives, and most importantly, through those programs and leadership at the academy instilled in me that I'm a resilient leader, that I have a lot to offer.
Awesome. This has been amazing. I mean, we always enjoy being able to take a peek behind the story of our Air Force Academy graduates and their leadership journeys. But I really appreciate the time and you really peeling back the layers, taking it back to your family, taking it back to some of the, just right away the lessons you learned from peer feedback and how to adapt and evolve and be resilient. And then when the moment calls for it, bring your voice back to those important moments when you need to, help others see a different perspective. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Long Blue Leadership today.
Thank you so much, and I just have to say mighty 90 for the class of 1990, as well as War Eagles for the CS-15 War Eagles. But thank you so much. It's been just an honor to be here with you, and I have really very much enjoyed this.
Thank you. And for all of you watching this or listening, be sure to share this journey with others who are also in their leadership journeys, whether in aviation or not, right? Just looking for what are those ways that our leaders are taking shape. We do this on this particular Long Blue Leadership episode and all of our others at longblueleadership.org. What really stuck with me about this particular conversation is to really be a leader for what the moment calls for. And I think that Lieutenant Colonel retired Kim Ford, class of 90, mighty 90, as she said, did it really well. So until next time, I'm Navir Walkowitz, class of 99, and we'll see you on Long Blue Leadership.
This Long Blue Leadership conversation was recorded on Monday, June 29th, 2026.